Sometimes, life just doesn't work out as you'd planned. A lot of us live on the borderline between failure and success, teetering somewhere between the two until death. It's a precarious and uncomfortable place to live. I had resigned myself to a life of dissatisfied semi-closure after rescuing Sarah from the Crimson Carnival. Sure, she wasn't quite the same, but we had our good days. A few cold stares and some sleepwalking in the night wasn't so bad. Her personality was different. She was less sympathetic and quick to anger. But for the most part, she was the same old Sarah who I had known before she had disappeared. The strangest part was, she claimed to remember nothing about the carnival. She said it was like a black space in her memory that she couldn't get back, no matter how hard she tried. I suggested therapy and other ways she could unlock the suppressed memories. But she refused, becoming more and more upset every time the subject was brought up. It got to the point where the mere mention of the carnival was enough to send her into a fury. She would swear and scream, saying I didn't love her anymore. She would throw things and slam doors and cabinets, causing me to become worried for her safety at times. She was so upset. It wasn't until she finally let it slip that I realized why she was getting so mad. It was at the tail end of one of our arguments, and she muttered, "I don't remember it, but every part of me wants to go back there. Wherever there is, it's pulling at me. Do you know what that feels like? To be told you can't have something when it's all you want in the world?" I tried to ask her to explain, fighting back feelings of hurt and betrayal. But she refused to say anything more on the subject. 2 days later, I saw her talking on the phone to someone, and she hung up quickly when she saw me coming. I didn't really believe her when she said it was just someone from work calling to ask if she could come in early the next morning. The look on her face said otherwise. It was no coincidence that Friday the 13th came around once again soon after, and I was awoken that night in the late hours by a phone call. It was Gary. "He's gone. I think he's gone back to that place." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up. Looking beside me, I saw that Sarah was gone as well. "Sarah's gone too," I replied. "Why would they go back there? We destroyed it. The whole thing burnt to the ground. They're just going back to an empty field in the countryside." He was breathing heavily, and I could hear that he was running. "I'm coming to get you. Don't go anywhere. Just wait for me there. They did the ritual already. I followed them out to the field where the place was, and it's back. The Crimson Carnival is back." I looked at the clock and saw it was still early enough, and realized what he wanted to do. He wanted to go back there, and he wanted me to come along as backup. The four of us had become close since escaping the Demon's Fairgrounds. All of the insanity involved in the experience had been too far-fetched to talk to anyone else about, and we had found ourselves becoming friends after our traumatic near-fatal experiences. Sarah and Bruce became a pair, I noticed, while Gary and I would talk about things from our perspectives and tried to remind them of what happened. Bruce's memory had been completely wiped clean of any recollections of the carnival as well. Soon, he also became reluctant to talk about the experience, getting quick to anger at the mere mention of it, the same as Sarah. Shortly afterwards, the four of us stopped talking as frequently. Sarah complained that all we ever did was talk about memories she didn't have access to. And I guess that Bruce felt the same way. Gary pulled up to the curb in his huge Cadillac, and I opened the passenger door to see his hand already bloodied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He held up the blade and told me to follow suit. Something felt very wrong about it, but I had no choice. We had to follow them, stop them from going back inside. I couldn't bear to lose her again. It felt like I had just gotten her back. I plunged the blade into my palm and couldn't help but notice the faintest hint of a smile play across Gary's face as I did so. We drove out into the countryside and took the meandering twists and turns that were required. Gary knew them all well from his previous journeys. The whole time, I felt as if I were in a nightmare. But I knew that I wasn't. I felt like I was no longer in control, and struggled to turn and address the man sitting next to me. He looked like Gary, but he no longer was Gary. I realize now that he had been taken over by the demon from the carnival. Who knew when it happened exactly? But I guessed right after I had set him on fire, he managed to jump into his body through some black magic trick. There was suddenly a banging noise from the trunk, shouting, and muffled screams. My heart began to hammer faster and faster as I struggled to speak. "Where's Gary?" The demon sitting next to me smiled ruefully and shifted the gear stick into fifth. "Gary's still in here. Somewhere. Although, I can't imagine he'll ever be the same after a few months with me behind the wheel, controlling his body. The things he's seen, the people I've eaten, whew! Poor guy is hysterical in there. Just keeps screaming and screaming to let him die. It's pathetic." He made one final turn to complete the journey, and I saw the carnival appearing out of the early morning mist in the distance. Its multicolored lights were hazy, becoming more and more distinct as we drew near to it. "You're really gullible. You know that, Jordan?" I couldn't speak for a moment, stunned as I was. I tried for months to convince Bruce and Sarah to do the ritual again, planting thoughts in their heads, instilling dreams in their minds while they slept, using up all of my remaining power. They almost went through with it too. They got together a few hours ago and were going to do the ritual and summon the carnival using the instructions from online, but they chickened out. They couldn't go through with it. I almost gave up, before realizing I had one last hope. You. Shaking my head, I looked at my bloody palm and knew I'd fucked up badly. All it took was me telling you she was there, and that we had to save her, and whoops, you go ahead and do a blood ritual and summon back the demonic carnival you just destroyed. Blood has a lot of power, you know. It can keep a demon alive if given willingly, but it has to be given willingly. Oh no. Oh yes. And now the four of you are going to be my newest additions. I think I'll make you into a clown, perhaps. You can never have too many of those. Please no. Anything but that. I really hate clowns. He pulled into the parking lot and revved the engine. The car pointed straight at the welcome clown who was reciting his repetitious speech. "What's the deal with the whole Friday the 13th thing? At least tell me that much." I was stalling for time now, grasping at straws and hoping for any chance out of this. The demon in a Gary suit thought about it for a second before answering. "I like you, Jordan. You've made my life a little bit more interesting for a few months, so I'll answer that question. And two more. Friday the 13th is my birthday, you could say. Demons can only live one birthday at a time without a blood sacrifice. The more blood we get, the more powerful we become. Needless to say, this place made me stronger than you could possibly imagine. And I'll get it all back soon enough. Once we're back at the center, at my place of power. The old ones tried to trap me here, but I used my weakness to my advantage. I rearranged it and reconfigured everything to suit my needs, rather than theirs. The carnival that was my prison is now my temple, my power plant. And the nickel to get inside? What about that? Money is more than just money, especially when it's old and hard to come by. When it's passed through many hands and has been coveted and treasured, you fools soak it in your blood, and it just gives me even more strength to pull people in. I can only live outside this place for so long, so I have no choice but to bring others to me. How did they imprison you here? And who's powerful enough to do that to you? He ignored the last questions. He hit the gas, and for reasons I wouldn't understand until later, he drove straight towards the welcome clown. We reached high speeds, and I pulled my arms out in front of me reflexively as I was thrown back by the acceleration. The car slammed into the jester and shuddered with the impact of the collision. I heard a loud thud, and the clown was up on the hood of the car, onto the windshield, which cracked as his head banged into it, and then was over the top and gone. We plowed through the turnstiles, and they went flying into the air as well, aluminum parts breaking and careening off into the night. I always hated that fucking clown. Not wanting to agree with him out loud, I decided to stay silent. The car drove down the aisle, through the midway towards the giant red canopy tent at the center of the fair. As we got closer, I realized I had only a few remaining moments to make a move, to try and escape and hopefully avoid becoming trapped there for the rest of eternity. I had to do something. But what? Up ahead was the carousel, and I realized I had never ventured into this part of the carnival before. It was on another leg of the star which spun around so that every time you entered you saw a different section. My mind raced thinking what to do, and I finally decided on something so stupid, so outright ridiculous that I figured it would just have to work. I reached over heroically, and with all of my cunning and strength, I unbuckled the demon's seatbelt. He raised his eyebrows. "That's your master plan, really? I figured you'd try something, but I mean, come on. What's the point of that even?" It appeared he was considering leaving it unbuckled, but then decided it might be part of some larger effort on my part and began to buckle it back up. Just for a moment, he took both hands off the wheel, and I took my opportunity. I grabbed the steering wheel and heaved it to the left towards the carousel, just as we were about to go past it. The car veered to the left, and I saw the look of surprise on his face as we slammed into the colorful painted facade below the ride. He hadn't quite managed to buckle his seatbelt back up again. Gary's face was his own, for just a second, as he registered total shock. His body flew through the air and smashed through the windshield, being thrown from the car and into the carousel. He landed on a purple horse which bobbed up and down and spun around in circles with the ride, until his limp body fell off to the floor. Since I had my seatbelt on, I managed to avoid most of the damage. But it was also an old car. There were no airbags, and the crash hurt like a motherfucker. I remembered Sarah and Bruce in the trunk after recovering my senses, and grabbed the keys, limping as I walked around to the back of the vehicle. I hoped they were all right after the collision. My hands were trembling as I unlocked the trunk and opened it. Sarah and Bruce were inside, unconscious. Shaking her, I tried to wake Sarah up, and her eyes fluttered open after a few seconds. "Sarah, are you hurt?" She shook her head, and I saw Bruce was waking up as well. Lying in the dark depths of the trunk, he began to moan and groan and come to his senses. I helped them both out of the trunk and looked up to see Gary's body still up on the carousel, going round and round with the horse, dragons, and unicorns. Music blasted from the speakers above. We have to get him out of here. If we can keep him out of this place, he'll die. He said it himself." I pointed up to the carousel and the half-dead man up there, who was now coming to, sitting up and spitting out blood and teeth. As we started walking towards him, he got to his feet. "You can't stop me. I am too powerful for you mere mortals to control." He was stumbling and spoke like he was half drunk and concussed. But still, he was terrifying. As we got near him, I saw that he was probably right. His eyes flickered with fire, and I guessed if we tried to subdue him, he would probably just kill us. Worse yet, the carnival workers had been drawn towards the sound of the explosion like zombies, and now surrounded us and were closing in. The three of us were up on the carousel as it spun around in circles, and the demon stood on the opposite side of the ride, watching us carefully as we approached. To my surprise, the carnival workers climbed up onto the carousel and stumbled towards the demon instead of us. "What are you doing? Get them, not me, get them!" He screamed as they surrounded him and began to attack him. I realized then he had no power over them any longer, not until he reached the center of the carnival where he was strongest, where his power was contained. Inside the canopy tent where he could feed on the blood of his slaves was where his strength lay. He was a prisoner there, trapped within the pentagram inside the star, using the blood power captured by the Crimson Carnival to stay alive and keep some semblance of strength. No longer. "We're going to free you all, just help us. Strap him to the roof of the car," I screamed, stopping them before they could spill his blood and rip poor Gary to pieces. They did as we asked, and pulled the semi-conscious demon from the carousel and threw him atop the battered car, which was beat up but still running. Using belts and string and any other implements we could find, we tied the demon to the roof of the car as he screamed and laughed, cackling and saying that what we did was no use. He said he already had his blood sacrificed and that this was all pointless. But I could hear the worry in his voice. "This is no use, you'll see. This fool gave his blood up willingly and brought this place back from the ashes. Kill him. He's the one to blame, let go of me. You have no idea who you're fucking with. You. I looked at my watch and saw we would have just enough time if we left immediately. The car was already running, and I heard the metal squeal and screech, and we backed out of the spot where the Cadillac had crashed into the wooden facade of the carousel. The demon was screaming from atop the car, but we just ignored him as I backed up and turned the car around. The carnival workers looked on with hopeful faces as the loose muffler rattled and the car made its way across the muddy ground towards the exit. We made it out through the wreckage of the turnstiles without incident, and pulled over to the side of the road outside the parking lot. The three of us got out of the car to check and make sure Gary's body was still tied to the roof, and I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw he had not escaped. It seems whatever blood magic the demon had been using, he was running low on fuel. "Any last words?" I asked the demon in Gary's body as the sun came up over the horizon. "I'll be back," he said. "You can kill me again and again, but I'll always come back. I'll never stay dead." The brilliant golden glow of the sun hit his face at that moment, and his skin began to smoke and sizzle. He screamed, and I saw the fire leave his eyes, and the green color that had been Gary's returned to them. Bruce looked at him with recognition, and saw he looked different as well. More human again. I turned around when I felt Sarah grab my hand. She squeezed it tightly, and I looked to see her eyes were pale blue once again, no longer the muddled purple they had been. The four of us watched silently as the Crimson Carnival evaporated before our eyes. It looked like an enormous fire being put out, as if a huge bucket of water had been dumped on it, as its thick black smoke rising up into the sky, and the flickering embers that had once been those trapped inside floated up into the haze, free.
Greetings, friends and fiends. Chronicler here. We here at Creepy Spaghet would like to thank Jgrupe for allowing us to tell their story. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to stay updated on these terrible tales. And be sure to check out the author and consider looking at their book, Beneath the Asylum, in the links below. If you're interested in having your story narrated, be sure to reach out to our humble overseer, as he continues his journey to pull the darkest stories from the infinite depths of the internet. Until next time, fiends.